The Forgotten Archive. The Silent Keeper. The galactic archive stretched across 3 moons, its crystalline towers holding the knowledge of 10,000 civilizations. Among the corridors of endless information, one human moved like a shadow. Her name was Dr. Sarah Chen, and officially, she was just a level 3 data curator. A librarian. Nothing more. The Zrakti Empire had ruled the galaxy for 5 centuries, their 4-armed scholars proud custodians of universal knowledge. They collected histories, technologies, and secrets from every corner of known space. And they looked down on humans the way one might regard clever pets, amusing, occasionally useful, but ultimately limited. Sarah wore the gray uniform of archive staff, her ID badge reflecting the amber light of the data crystals around her. She pushed her cart through section 447B, a forgotten wing where old physical records gathered cosmic dust. Digital was superior, the Zrakti insisted. These paper artifacts and magnetic tapes were merely kept for novelty. She stopped at a particular shelf and pulled out a box labeled Earth, pre-contact agricultural records. Inside were farming almanacs from rural Kansas, circa 2087. Boring. Useless. Exactly what the Zrakti thought of human contributions. Sarah smiled and opened the almanac to page 47. The hidden language. The symbols looked like weather patterns and crop rotations. But if you knew where to look, if you understood the old human art of steganography, you could see the real message woven between the lines. Coordinates. Frequencies. Access codes. Her neural implant buzzed softly, decoding the information automatically. Sarah had spent 3 years in this archive, 3 years pretending to be simple and compliant. 3 years building a map of every security system, every classified vault, every piece of forbidden knowledge the Zrakti had locked away. Curator Chen. The voice made her jump. She turned to find Archon Velthruz, the head of historical records, his golden eyes studying her with alien intensity. His 4 arms were folded in a gesture that meant either contemplation or suspicion. Sarah had never quite learned which. Archon, she said, bowing slightly. I was just cataloging the agricultural section. These Earth records are fascinating in their simplicity. Velthruz's mandibles clicked, a Zrakti laugh. Indeed. Humans and your dirt. You remained farmers even when you reached for the stars. He moved closer, his 7-foot frame towering over her. Tell me, Curator Chen, why does a woman with 3 doctorate degrees in information science accept a position sorting through obsolete paper? Sarah met his gaze calmly. Because someone needs to preserve even the small things, Archon. History isn't just about great empires. Sometimes it's about wheat yields and weather patterns. Velthruz picked up the almanac, his multiple eyes scanning the pages. For a moment, Sarah's heart stopped. But he saw only what he expected to see, primitive human data collection. He set it down. Carry on, then. Though I wonder if your talents might be better used elsewhere. He glided away, his robes whispering against the floor. Sarah waited until his footsteps faded completely before she let out her breath. The council chamber. That evening, Sarah attended the mandatory Assembly of Records, where senior archivists presented their findings to the Council of Keepers. It was usually tedious, long speeches about proper filing systems and database optimization. But tonight was different. High Keeper Zaldan, supreme authority of the archive, stood at the central podium. His crimson robes marked him as one of the Zrakti elite, a being who had lived for 3 centuries and accumulated power to match. We have discovered something unprecedented, Zaldan announced, his voice booming through the chamber. In Vault 7, sealed for 200 years, we have found records of the precursors, the ancient race that predated all current civilizations. A murmur rippled through the assembled aliens. The precursors were legend, a myth used to scare children with tales of being so advanced they transcended physical reality. The records are encoded, Zaldan continued. Our finest cryptographers have failed to decipher them. The knowledge contained within could reshape the galaxy, new technologies, perhaps even the secret of faster-than-light travel without jump gates. Sarah listened, her face carefully neutral. But inside, her mind raced. She had read whispers of this vault in her hidden research. The Zrokti didn't know what they'd found, not really. And they couldn't decode it because they were looking for complexity. Humans, though, humans knew that sometimes the most sophisticated codes looked simple. The challenge. We are opening the decryption task to all archive personnel, Zaldan declared. Any being who can unlock these records will be elevated to High Keeper status and granted access to all restricted knowledge. The chamber erupted in excited chatter. This was unprecedented. The Zrokti guard their power carefully, but they were also pragmatists. If someone could unlock precursor technology, the Zrokti Empire would become unstoppable. Sarah raised her hand. The gesture was so small, so tentative, that several minutes passed before anyone noticed. Finally, Archon Velthruz pointed at her with one of his forearms. The human wishes to speak? Laughter rippled through the chamber. Sarah stood, her small frame dwarfed by the towering aliens around her. I would like to attempt the decryption, she said quietly. The laughter grew louder. High Keeper Zaldam tilted his massive head, studying her like an unusual insect. You, Curator Chen? A level 3 data sorter? His mandibles clicked in amusement. You realize our finest minds have failed. Beings with neural processing capacity 1,000 times your own. Yes, High Keeper, Sarah said. But sometimes a fresh perspective helps. And I have studied ancient information storage systems as part of my work with Earth Archives. More laughter. But Zaldan raised a hand for silence. Very well. You will be given 6 hours with the records under supervised conditions. When you fail, perhaps it will teach you humans some humility about your limitations. Sarah bowed deeply. Thank you, High Keeper. As she walked back to her station, she caught Velthruz watching her with those golden eyes. He didn't look amused anymore. He looked curious. The vault. They led her to Vault 7 at midnight, when the archive was nearly empty. 2 Zrokti guards flanked her, their plasma rifles charged and ready. They thought she might try to steal something, perhaps. They didn't understand that the greatest theft had already been completed, 3 years of carefully memorized security protocols and access codes. The vault door was massive, carved with warnings in 40 different languages. Inside, the chamber was small and cold. In the center stood a pedestal, and on that pedestal rested a crystalline cube the size of a human fist. It pulsed with faint blue light, and covering every surface were symbols, thousands of them, overlapping and interweaving in patterns that seemed to shift when you looked directly at them. You have 6 hours, said the guard captain, his translator rendering his words in flat English. We will be watching through the security feed. Touch nothing but the display interface. The door sealed behind them, leaving Sarah alone with the cube. She smiled and got to work. The Zrokti had tried brute force decryption, quantum analysis, neural pattern matching. They had thrown their most advanced technology at this puzzle and failed. They had never tried singing to it. Sarah pulled up the display interface and began to hum, a simple melody, almost like a lullaby. The cube's pulsing matched her rhythm. She adjusted her pitch, searching for resonance. There. The symbols began to glow brighter. Computer, she whispered to her neural implant, analyze the frequency pattern. Cross-reference with human musical notation, specifically ancient Celtic tuning systems. The data flooded her mind. The precursors hadn't used complexity to hide their knowledge. They had used something the Zrokti had never valued, art, emotion, the irrational beauty of music. Sarah sang louder now, her voice filling the vault. The symbols rearranged themselves, dancing to her melody. And slowly, like dawn breaking over a dark ocean, the message became clear. It wasn't a technology schematic. It wasn't a weapon design. It was a warning. The truth unveiled. The cube projected a hologram, a figure that looked almost human, but wasn't quite. Their eyes held too much sadness, too much knowledge. If you were watching this, the figure said in a language that Sarah's implant struggled to translate, then your civilization has reached the threshold. You have conquered your world. You have reached the stars. You have begun to believe you are special. The figure's expression grew sorrowful. You are not. You are the 47th cycle. The Zrakti were the 46th. Before them, the Krell. Before them, the Vastari. Each time, a species rises, builds an empire, hoards knowledge, and calls it enlightenment. Sarah's blood ran cold. Each time, the precursor continued, they forget the lesson we learned too late, knowledge without wisdom is a blade without a handle. It cuts the one who wields it. The hologram shifted, showing vast cities crumbling, stars going dark, entire civilizations turning their own technologies into instruments of destruction. We were the first, the precursor said. We mastered everything. We thought ourselves gods. And then we discovered the one thing that cannot be mastered, existence itself rebels against those who would control it completely. We built this archive, they continued, not to preserve our greatness, but to warn those who come after. Every 40,000 years, the cycle repeats. A new species rises. They find our ruins. They take our technology. They make the same mistakes. The hologram leaned forward, as if looking directly at Sarah. But perhaps you will be different. Perhaps you will understand what the Zrakti cannot. True knowledge isn't about collecting information. It's about knowing what not to do with it. The image faded, leaving one final message floating in the air. The key to breaking the cycle is not in reaching higher. It is in staying human. The choice that changed everything. The weight of truth. Sarah stood in the vault, the cube's light fading to a soft pulse. Her hands trembled. The precursor's warning echoed in her mind, 47 cycles, 47 civilizations that had reached for the stars only to collapse under the weight of their own ambition. And the Zrakti were heading down the same path. The door behind her hissed open. High Keeper Zaldan entered, followed by a full complement of guards and archivists. Delthrus was among them, his golden eyes fixed on her face. Well, Curator Chen? Zaldan's voice carried both amusement and anticipation. I trust 6 hours was sufficient time to demonstrate human inadequacy? Sarah turned slowly. Every face in the room expected her failure. Every being there believed humans were interesting but limited, good for labor, decent at simple tasks, but incapable of matching Zrakti brilliance. She could give them what they expected. Apologize for wasting their time. Return to her cart and her forgotten archives. Let the Zrakti keep searching, keep trying to unlock the cube's secrets with their technology and their pride. Or she could change everything. I decoded it, Sarah said quietly. The chamber went silent. Zaldan's mandibles stopped mid-click. Even the guards seemed to freeze. Impossible, Delthrus breathed. Our quantum computers analyzed that cube for months. You were looking for complexity, Sarah interrupted, her voice growing stronger. The precursors didn't hide their message in algorithms or quantum encryption. They hid it in something simpler. Something you've forgotten the value of. She activated the cube. The hologram appeared again, the ancient precursor speaking their warning to the assembled Zrakti. Sarah watched their faces change, confusion becoming shock, shock becoming something like fear. The reaction. When the message ended, silence filled the vault like a physical presence. High Keeper Zaldan stood motionless, his 4 arms hanging at his sides. The other archivists whispered among themselves, their translators creating a babble of different languages all expressing the same disbelief. This must be verified, Zaldan said finally. It could be a human trick. A falsified. It's real, Delthrus interrupted, his voice hollow. I recognize the linguistic markers. The quantum signature. This is precursor technology. He turned to Sarah, and for the first time, she saw something in his eyes that might have been respect. How did you decode it? Music, Sarah said simply. The symbols weren't encryption. They were notation. The precursors encoded their warning in a song. I just had to find the right key. But why? Another archivist demanded. Why would an advanced civilization use something so primitive? Sarah smiled sadly. Maybe because they learned that the most important messages shouldn't be locked away. They should be accessible to anyone willing to listen. Even a simple human librarian. The words hung in the air, their implications slowly sinking in. The Council's dilemma. An emergency session of the High Council was convened within the hour. Sarah was brought to the central chamber, a vast space where holographic representatives from across the Zrakti Empire gathered to make decisions that shaped the galaxy. She had never been this close to real power before. Hundreds of Zrakti lords, each ruling entire star systems, their images projected in crystalline perfection around the circular hall. And at the center, small and alone, stood one human woman in a gray librarian's uniform. Curator Chen, the Supreme Chancellor, spoke, her voice resonating from a throne that seemed to be made of starlight. You have presented us with disturbing information. Information that challenges our understanding of galactic history. Yes, Chancellor, Sarah said. The Council must decide how to respond to this precursor warning. But first, we have a question for you. The Chancellor leaned forward. Why did you decode this message? Surely you must have realized what it would mean, that you would challenge our authority, question our right to rule. Sarah took a breath. This was the moment. The choice that would define everything that came after. Because someone had to, she said. Your Excellency, with respect, the Zrakti Empire has spent 5 centuries collecting knowledge. You've gathered every secret, every technology, every piece of information from 1,000 worlds. But you've stopped asking the most important question. And what question is that? The Chancellor asked, her tone dangerous. What is knowledge for? The chamber erupted in angry chatter. Several council members demanded Sarah's immediate arrest for insolence. But the Chancellor raised a hand, and silence fell like a curtain. Explain, she commanded. The humans answer. Sarah stood straighter. The precursors weren't warning about knowledge itself. They were warning about what happens when a civilization treats knowledge as power to be hoarded rather than wisdom to be shared. Every empire that came before you made the same mistake. They thought control of information meant control of destiny. She gestured to the holographic council members surrounding her. You've built an empire on collected knowledge. You've taken the discoveries of 1,000 species and locked them in your archives, granting access only to those you deem worthy. You've created a hierarchy where information flows downward but never up. And you would suggest what, human? The Chancellor's voice could have frozen plasma. That we simply give away our most precious resource? Let any fool with curiosity access technologies they couldn't possibly understand? No, Sarah said. I'm suggesting you remember what knowledge is actually for. It's not a weapon. It's not currency. It's a tool for solving problems, but only if it reaches the people who have those problems. She activated her neural implant, projecting data into the chamber. Your empire faces 47 different ecological crises across 12 systems. You have the technology to solve them, stored in restricted archives. Meanwhile, species with the practical experience to implement solutions have been classified as primitive and denied access. You have 17 different subject races developing their own faster-than-light technologies independently, dangerous, unstable research that will kill millions. You could share your stable jump gate designs, but you've kept them classified to maintain your monopoly on interstellar travel. You have. Enough. The Chancellor's voice boomed through the chamber. You dare lecture us on governance? You, whose species still fights wars over territory and ideology. Yes, Sarah said simply. Because we've made those mistakes. We've hoarded resources and called it security. We've kept secrets and called it wisdom. And it nearly destroyed us 3 times before we learned. She met the Chancellor's gaze without flinching. The precursors are warning you that the path you're on leads to collapse. Not because knowledge is dangerous, but because treating it as property rather than responsibility will turn your greatest strength into your fatal weakness. The Keeper's revelation. Archon Velthrus stepped forward from his position among the junior council members. "If I may speak, Chancellor?" The Supreme Chancellor nodded, clearly curious what the Archive's chief keeper would say. "I have worked with Curator Chen for 3 years," Velthrus said. "I believed I was observing a competent but unremarkable human, performing simple tasks with adequate efficiency." His mandibles clicked in what might have been embarrassment. "I was wrong. She was studying us. Learning our systems. Understanding our weaknesses." Several council members hissed in alarm. Velthrus raised his hands. "Not to sabotage, to help. While we catalogued information, she was learning how it flowed, where it stuck, where it was needed but couldn't reach. She built a map of our empire's knowledge gaps, all while filing agricultural records and sorting old data crystals." He turned to Sarah. "I've reviewed your work now, looking deeper. Every section you were assigned to organize, you identified critical information that was being underutilized. You left notes, suggestions, cross-references. Most were ignored because you were just a librarian." Velthrus addressed the council again. "The human didn't just decode the precursor warning. She embodied it. While we sought to accumulate knowledge, she worked to distribute it. While we built walls, she built bridges." "And you believe this justifies her insolence?" the Chancellor asked. "I believe it proves the precursor's point," Velthrus said quietly. "The 46th cycle, the civilization before us, they collapsed 200 years ago. We found their ruins, their technologies, their archives. We believed we were better, smarter. We would succeed where they failed." He gestured to Sarah. "But a human librarian succeeded where our greatest minds failed, not because she was more intelligent, but because she approached the problem differently. She didn't try to conquer the puzzle. She tried to understand it." The decision. The Supreme Chancellor was silent for a long moment. Finally, she spoke. "The Council will deliberate. Curator Chen, you will be confined to quarters until we reach a decision. Archon Velthrus, you will prepare a full analysis of the precursor data." Sarah was escorted from the chamber by guards who now seemed uncertain how to treat her. Was she a prisoner or a dignitary? She had challenged the most powerful beings in the galaxy, and she was still alive. That alone was unprecedented. 3 days passed. Sarah spent them in a comfortable but locked apartment, watching the news feeds. Across the Empire, word of the precursor warning was spreading. Some saw it as proof of Srakti superiority. They had survived where 46 civilizations had failed. Others questioned whether their empire was truly as stable as they believed. Humans across Srakti space were watching too, seeing one of their own stand before the High Council and speak truth to power. Sarah received thousands of messages, some praising her courage, others warning her that she had gone too far. On the 4th day, Velthrus came to her door. "The council has decided," he said. "You're to come with me." The new archive. They didn't take her to the council chamber. Instead, Velthrus led her through corridors she had never seen before, deep into the heart of the archive. They passed through security checkpoints that required biometric scans from multiple species, through vaults that held technologies Sarah couldn't even name. Finally, they arrived at a door that seemed to be made of solid light. "The Chancellor wants to see you," Velthrus said. "Alone." The door opened, and Sarah stepped through into a chamber unlike anything she had ever seen. It wasn't large, just a simple room with a desk, 2 chairs, and windows that looked out onto the infinite starfield. The Supreme Chancellor sat at the desk, without her ceremonial robes, without her guards. Just an old Srakti woman who had lived 3 centuries and carried the weight of an empire. "Sit, Curator Chen," the Chancellor said, her voice tired. Sarah sat. "I've made a decision that will likely end my political career," the Chancellor began. "The Council is divided. Half want to execute you for sedition. A quarter want to ignore your warning and continue as we have. The rest." She paused. The rest are afraid you might be right. And you, Chancellor? Sarah asked quietly. I've been in power for 80 years. I've seen the Empire grow, prosper, become the dominant force in this galaxy. I believed our success proved our superiority. The Chancellor's eyes met Sarah's. Your warning makes me wonder if we've simply been luckier than the civilizations that came before us. She stood and walked to the window, looking out at the stars. The precursors left other messages. We've decoded 3 more since you unlocked the first. They all say the same thing: accumulating knowledge without distributing wisdom leads to collapse. Every time. Without exception. The Chancellor turned back to Sarah. So I'm taking a risk. A terrible, frightening risk that may destroy everything we've built. Or it may save us. What risk? Sarah asked. I'm appointing you High Keeper of the Galactic Archive, the Chancellor said. You will have full authority to reorganize how knowledge is stored, accessed, and distributed throughout the Empire. You will have the power to declassify restricted information, to share technologies with subject species, to tear down the walls we've spent centuries building. Sarah felt her heart stop. Chancellor, I'm just a librarian. Exactly, the Chancellor said. You're not a politician seeking power. You're not a scientist hoarding discoveries. You're someone who understands that knowledge is only valuable if it reaches the people who need it. She smiled, a strange expression on her alien features. And apparently, you've spent 3 years preparing for exactly this opportunity. There will be resistance, Sarah said. The noble houses, the military, the academic institutions, they all benefit from the current system. I know. That's why you'll need help. The Chancellor activated a holographic display. I'm creating a new council, the Council of Keepers. Representatives from every species in the Empire, chosen not for their rank but for their wisdom. Including several humans who've been working in the archives, apparently building their own maps of knowledge flow. Sarah recognized some of the names on the list. Her fellow, simple librarians who had been doing exactly what she had, quietly working to make information more accessible while everyone assumed they were just filing records. This will take decades, Sarah said. Maybe centuries. Changing how an entire empire thinks about knowledge. Then it's fortunate that Zrakdi lived for 300 years, and we have medical technology to extend human lifespans considerably. The Chancellor's mandibles clicked in what might have been amusement. You'll have time, Curator Chen. The question is, will you accept? The answer. Sarah looked out at the stars, thinking about the 47 cycles, the civilizations that had risen and fallen. She thought about the precursor's warning and the choice before her. She could accept this position and spend the rest of her life fighting against systems designed to concentrate power. She would make enemies. She would face resistance. She might fail completely. Or she could decline and return to her simple life, knowing that the galaxy would likely repeat the same mistakes that had destroyed 46 civilizations before. I accept, Sarah said. But I have conditions. The Chancellor raised an eyebrow. You dare negotiate with the Supreme Chancellor? You asked me to change how an empire manages knowledge, Sarah said. That's going to require some unorthodox approaches. Such as? First, the title is wrong. Not High Keeper, that implies hoarding. I want to be called the Chief Librarian. It's what I am. The Chancellor actually laughed. Very well. What else? The archive gets a new motto, carved above every entrance: knowledge grows when shared. And we start a program: every young Zrakdi spends 1 year working in information distribution before they're allowed to enter the upper ranks of any profession. Let them learn early that there's no such thing as useless information or insignificant workers. Sarah stood, meeting the Chancellor's gaze directly. And finally, we send a message to every species in the Empire. Tell them the truth about the precursor warning. Let them know we're changing how we approach knowledge. Invite them to help us build something better than an empire, a true collaborative civilization. The Chancellor was quiet for a long moment. Then she extended one of her 4 hands. Agreed. Chief Librarian Chen, you have your mandate. Don't make me regret this. Sarah shook her hand, a human gesture that the Chancellor had learned for this specific moment. I'll try not to, Chancellor. But I should warn you, once knowledge starts flowing freely, there's no stopping it. Good, the Chancellor said. Maybe that's exactly what we need. The new beginning. 6 months later, Sarah stood in the main hall of the Galactic Archive. Where once there had been restricted vaults and access terminals requiring high-level clearance, now there were open reading rooms and information kiosks available to any being who wanted to learn. It had been a battle. 3 high keepers had resigned in protest. Several noble houses had threatened secession. The military had filed 47 formal complaints about security risks. But slowly, things were changing. A team of Threxian engineers, given access to previously restricted climate technology, had solved an ecological crisis that would have killed billions. A human medical team, working with declassified Zrokti biotechnology, had developed a cure for a plague that had ravaged the outer colonies for decades. Delthrus approached her, carrying a data crystal. The latest numbers, Chief Librarian. Cross-species collaboration is up 340%. Patent filings from non-Zrokti sources have increased 500%. And we've received 12,000 applications for the new Knowledge Distribution Internship Program. Any from Zrokti nobility? Sarah asked. Delthrus clicked his mandibles, definitely amusement this time. 342. Turns out when you make it fashionable to actually understand how information flows, even the elite want to participate. Sarah smiled. And the resistance? Still there. Still loud. But they're losing ground. Delthrus looked around the bustling archive. You were right, you know. Knowledge does grow when shared. We're making more discoveries now, in 6 months of open collaboration, than we did in the previous 50 years of controlled research. A group of children, Zrokti, human, and Threxian mixed together, ran past, laughing, on their way to a public lecture about ancient civilizations. One of them dropped a data pad, and Sarah picked it up, glancing at the screen. It was a report on the 47 cycles, written for young students. The conclusion read, "The precursors taught us that knowledge without wisdom leads to collapse. The Zrokti are learning that wisdom means sharing what you know, not hoarding it. And a human librarian showed us that sometimes the smartest thing you can do is ask the right question instead of having all the answers." Sarah handed the pad back to the child, who thanked her and ran off. She turned to Delthrus. How long do you think it will take for the change to really stick? Generations, Delthrus said. Maybe longer. Changing culture is slow work. Then we'd better get started, Sarah said. I have a meeting with representatives from the outer colonies. They want to establish local knowledge centers, outside Zrokti control. And you're approving this? Delthrus asked, surprised. Of course. If we've learned anything from the precursors, it's that concentrating knowledge in one place, under one authority, is exactly how civilizations fall. She smiled. Besides, I'm just a librarian. My job is to help people find information, not control it. The legacy. Years passed. Decades. Sarah's hair turned gray, then white. Medical technology kept her healthy, kept her working, but she was still human. Still mortal. But the changes she had started? Those grew stronger every year. The Zrokti Empire slowly transformed into something new, not an empire at all, but a federation of knowledge-sharing species, each contributing and learning from the others. The precursors' warning about the 47 cycles became required study in every school. Not as a threat, but as a reminder, accumulating power for its own sake is a path to destruction. True strength comes from lifting others up. On Sarah's 100th birthday, the Federation held a ceremony. Representatives from 300 species gathered to honor the human who had changed the galaxy by simply doing her job well, the librarian who had understood that the most valuable knowledge isn't knowing everything, but knowing that you don't, and being willing to learn from anyone. The Supreme Chancellor, not the same one who had appointed Sarah, but her successor, presented her with a gift. It was a small thing, a new badge, simple and plain. It read, Sarah Chen. Chief Librarian. Student of the Universe. We added that last part, the Chancellor said. Because you taught us that no matter how much we know, there's always more to learn. And the moment we forget that lesson, we become the 48th cycle instead of the species that broke the pattern. Sarah looked out at the gathering, at beings from species that had once been subjects, now equals. At technologies being shared freely. At knowledge flowing like water, reaching everywhere, nurturing everything it touched. Thank you, she said quietly. But I didn't do this alone. Every person who chose to share instead of hoard, to teach instead of control, to ask questions instead of assuming they knew all the answers, they're the real heroes of this story. Perhaps, the Chancellor said. But you were the first. You showed us it was possible. Sarah smiled. No. The precursors showed us. I just read their message and believed them. Maybe that's the real lesson. Sometimes the wisest thing you can do is listen to those who came before and learn from their mistakes. She looked up at the stars, visible through the archive's transparent ceiling. Somewhere out there, the next species was rising. The next civilization was reaching for greatness. And thanks to the library Sarah had built, physical and digital, open and accessible, they would have access to the combined knowledge of 50 species who had learned to work together instead of conquering each other. Maybe that would be enough. Maybe the cycle really was broken this time. Or maybe, Sarah thought, every generation has to make that choice for themselves. The choice between hoarding and sharing. Between power and wisdom. Between building walls and building bridges. All she could do was make sure the knowledge was there when they were ready for it. After all, she was just a librarian. But sometimes, that's exactly what the galaxy needs.